Hey there. Today we're doing something a little bit different. I am going to be giving a book review of Cal Newport's new book called Slow Productivity. And I know that a lot of you listening have probably heard about this book. Maybe you've even already started reading it. And I know this because I received a ton of messages over the last several weeks asking my take on the book. So I knew I needed to pick it up and read it. And I'll tell you this, I went in with kind of certain expectations, and the reality of what I uncovered in the book, it was more complicated than I anticipated. Well, hey there, friends. Today I'm going to be reviewing Cal Newport's latest book called Slow Productivity. And before we dive in, I'm going to be very upfront because it's really, really important to understand this in context to his book. The book has incredibly valuable concepts. But as I talk through all of this, it's really important that we all understand one key thing. Cal has written this book with one particular type of person in mind. This was not a book that he wrote with the lens of a slow productivity solution for everyone. All right. And it's going to be important to remember that. And I'm going to touch on that a lot as we go. Now, before we dive in, I've got a huge favor to ask of you. The best way to ensure that I keep showing up here at the Work Life Harmony podcast in your ears every single week is if you could take 30 seconds and head over to wherever you are listening to your podcast and leave a 5-star review. That really helps the show, and it ensures that we are able to continue to show up week after week. All right, so let's first give kind of an overview of this slow productivity book. Now, Cal Newport is, an expert in the productivity space. This is not his first book. He has been producing content for a very, very long time. Highly researched, highly backed content and information all around productivity. This particular book and what a lot of his writings, etc., are about is specifically what he calls for knowledge workers. Now, here's what I want you thinking about. This is what he means when he's talking about a knowledge worker. Think a writer, a consultant, a researcher, a professor, right? Someone whose job involves thinking, analyzing, creating more so. And these type of people typically have a lot more control over how they're structuring their time. Right. And in contrast, think back to or think of, more factory line kind of worker. And he gives that example at the beginning. That is not what he is considering as a knowledge worker, where you are showing up, set hours, you're producing X number of widgets, and your productivity is measured on that. All right. So this book was really written with the lens of slow productivity for knowledge workers. Now, he absolutely argues that our modern approach to productivity, which is pretty much always being busy, always being on, always responding, right? We see this everywhere: hustle, 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 make every minute count, right? Fit it in the nooks and crannies of your day. He is arguing that that approach is making us less productive and burned out. And you guys know I 100% am in alignment with that. And then he actually calls out that a lot of the work that we're actually doing, and by work, ways we're spending my time, he calls it pseudo work. So activities that make you feel productive, right? Because you're, quote, doing things are being checked off, but they don't actually create meaningful value. And again, we're thinking specifically with this knowledge worker lens on. So, one of the most common examples is excessively checking your email, right? In and out of your email box all day long, like you're in and out every 5-10 minutes. That's pseudo work. Unnecessary meetings. I could talk about that for hours. That is pseudo work, right? And all of this kind of busy work. And he's saying that is eating up so much of our time that we're not actually being productive. And he really blames practically all of this on technology. Now, with all of that introduction, I don't disagree with any of that, right? You guys have heard me talk about the role that I believe technology has played in the rise of why so many women are unbelievably overwhelmed. And it doesn't just sit for overwhelmed women, right? Tech is creating noise, disruption, distraction all over the place. There is a missing part here in the book when he kind of premises all of this about the knowledge worker, and I'll touch on it a little bit in a couple of the sections, is he is not necessarily capturing a knowledge worker who is also a primary caregiver. Because when you are in a primary caregiver role, that introduces new complexities and new requirements of your time that you just don't have control over. That little slice is not really covered in this book, but he's not pretending to either. So that's not meant to be a ding against the book in any way. I just kind of wanted to set that stage before we break down kind of the three parts of his book. Because if you're listening to this and you are maybe in a job right now that isn't knowledge worker focused, where it really is task management based, some of what he shares may not sit well with you, and that's okay. Now, if you are in a knowledge worker world, I absolutely think this book would be of great benefit for you to read. So he breaks down that slow productivity essentially has three core principles. So I'll tell you what the three are, and then let's take a little dive into each one of these. So the first principle is that you do fewer things. And some of you are probably laughing like, yeah, wouldn't that be nice? But hear me out. So do fewer things is principle number one. Principle number two is work at a natural pace. And I think this is probably my most favorite. And then principle number three is to obsess over quality. Now, I will tell you, when I first heard principle number three, I was like, well, this is going to be an interesting one. So let's talk through each one of these. So the first principle of doing fewer things. Now, what he is referring to is to stop juggling multiple projects simultaneously. So if, first thought you think do fewer things means just work less. No, be focusing on fewer projects at a time. He really highlights, no more than 2 to 3 major projects at a time, and don't embark on another one until you've wrapped one up, right? Resist the temptation for that multitasking mindset. I 100% believe in this as well. And actually, the way I teach when we're doing strategic longer term planning, I'm always encouraging people, hey, you may have a number of goals for the year. Maybe you've got 6 or 7 of them, but it doesn't mean that we're working on all of them simultaneously, right? Now, he is 100% correct that multitasking is the killer of productivity. There's tons and tons of research out there that backs this up. And again, we're talking multitasking where your brain power is trying to focus on 2 things at once. Again, we're talking about the knowledge worker workday when we're talking about multitasking, right? He's not talking about life outside of that. And that when we focus on fewer projects and we're not trying to multitask or bounce back and forth in between them, we're going to get better quality, right? Our outcomes are going to be better. Now, this ultimately challenges this very toxic culture that we're in right now, which is more, 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 right? And it is going to require us to put up some really good boundaries. Now, let's take a little reality check on here, where the challenging parts of this are. Even if you are in a knowledge worker world, you may have a boss, a supervisor, etc., who is not in alignment with that, right? They may say, no, I need it all, and I need it all done now. However, what I love is Cal actually gives really good, realistic, truly implementable suggestions and techniques on how to actually achieve this in the workplace. Meaning, what conversations do you have? How do you put boundaries up with coworkers, supervisors, etc.? I know when I'm on coaching calls with women and they come to me with, I've got so much going on at work, it just keeps adding to my plate. I don't know how to get it all done. Like, Megan, tell me how to get it all done. I'm like, well, you can't. And the first thing I always encourage is having what I consider a data-driven conversation with your supervisor, which means you make the list of here is everything that I am currently being tasked to do here at work, and you come prepared to say, this is what I believe the priority order is. Is this in alignment with you? Right? Because it's going to visually show there's too much here. It's not physically possible to get it all done. And now it's going to open the door for the conversation of how do we prioritize this, right? Now, Cal really goes in depth on a number of ways to be able to achieve this in that knowledge worker workplace that are super helpful. So now let's jump into kind of the second core principle, which is working at a natural pace. I love this, especially this time of year. As we jump into Q4 and the end of the year, we start to see all sorts of messages out there of the like, it's time to dig in, right? You've only got so many weeks left. Let's make it count. Make sure you end the year strong. What that's implying is that we're not going to work at a sustainable place, right? So I always prefer to, how about instead we use a planning system that creates a sustainable pace all year long instead of constantly jumping in and out of high intensity work, right? The human body is not designed for that. And Cal explicitly states that in this section as well. He is very into either seasonal rhythms, taking regular breaks throughout the day. I know I certainly do. And allowing for periods of, if you do have to do a high intensity, sprint or push, that then you create a plan that supports rest time after it. Right. We all have, I mean, I still do. I'm an excellent planner, but I know my life right now has seasons where things are a little bit more intense. Right now, here in Q4, the month of October is an intense month for me because I'm doing Planapalooza and other things. I know that well ahead of time so that I plan in intentional rest in November and December so I can be focused on other things. The really good around this working at a sustainable pace is that it building in rest periods really helps prevent burnout. We all know that. And if possible, working with your own natural energy cycles is smart. As I was, reading this part of the book, I kept thinking, well, that's not doable. That's not doable. But then when I took a step back with some of the strategies he was giving, I realized again, under the context of knowledge workers, it's absolutely way more doable than if you're in an environment where you're not working as a knowledge worker. Because the reality is outside of that bubble, and even in some work environments, right? If you're on a stretch to getting something out speed to market and you're in a high paced environment, natural pace isn't always a luxury that everybody has. And maybe work deadlines aren't supporting you working at that sustainable pace. He does give some great examples. He's always backing everything up with examples and strategies that you can use. And when he was talking some about this, he's bringing up the, okay, well, what if you've got a plan, but then something happens that derails your plan? And this was kind of one area in the book where even as a knowledge worker, I would suggest something different. He really talks about making daily plans. You wake up, you make your plan for the day, and then shares if something goes wrong and the plan doesn't execute well in the morning, that you fix your plan midday. So when life happens to you, you just quote, update your plan. Now, even under the lens of knowledge worker work, I still would not advise daily planning. I would still 100% say weekly planning is going to yield much higher results. It's going to make a replan much easier. Because if you're replanning in the confines of one calendar day, right? One day, and it's later in the day, the only way to replan is to go, well, I don't know when I'm going to get it done, or stay up late. That's not really a replan, right? So I would still advise, even for knowledge workers, if you truly want that sustainable pace where when life happens, you can easily replan, I would be setting out your plan for the week, not the day. The third principle that he talks about is obsessing over quality. And his whole premise behind this is saying that we need to be focusing on our craftsmanship and excellence over speed or quantity, right? So we're really zeroing in on high quality. And he's talking about developing mastery in your core skills. And that quality work is going to create more value than rushed, mediocre efforts. And of course, on the surface, all of that is fantastic because when we can shift our focus on quality over quantity, it's a really valuable mindset shift, right? And even when you think about, for example, Cal writing this book, right? Obsessing over quality of the book and having an excellent New York Times bestseller is a more desirable outcome than 4 mediocre books that people aren't reading. And when you take this, excellence mindset into your work, it can often bring a lot more satisfaction. And it helps us understand that producing one thing of extreme value is incredibly productive. Because in today's world, it seems like quantity wins, right? If you do 10 things more than your neighbor, you're more productive than them. But this approach is saying, no, something of value is highly productive. The concern that I know I felt when I was reading this, and I'm sure many of you out there can relate to, is it's a slippery slope when we are obsessing over quality to land into perfectionism, right? Which means we're never done. And I know I can fall into this, right? If I'm working on something, maybe it's a blog post or something for my website or a teaching content that I'm coming up with, I could do that for 3 weeks straight and still not feel like it's good enough. So that it was kind of left as a vague, slippery slope there. So here's a tip that I want to give all of you if you struggle with this, but you like the idea of, yeah, I really want to focus on quality over quantity. The tool that I use, and it's what I teach all the women I work with anytime we're setting goals, one of the first things that we do is we've got to come up with a clear definition of what done means, right? So that if we are, and we can obsess over the quality of that definition of done, so that once we've hit it, we can say we're done. Now, it doesn't mean that maybe later you decide, you know what? I'd like to revisit that and make it even better. Well, then you can treat that as a second project, if you will. So I would encourage anyone that struggles with perfectionism, take what Cal is saying here about obsessing over quality, know thyself to know, do I need to put some boundaries around this? Because if not, you could end up in a spiral where nothing ever gets done, right? Because you're never satisfied with it. The bottom line with this book, again, he has been in this productivity space for a very long time. His research is always solid, it's backed, it's fantastic. And I would absolutely recommend that anyone that is in a knowledge working space reads this book. 100%, especially if you are a knowledge worker in an environment where you feel like too much is being put on you and that the pace they're trying to keep is way too strong. So definitely read it up. Now, I will say some women have reached out to me who have read it and are like, I'm trying to apply these principles and I'm struggling, and they're not in a knowledge worker space. So they're in a completely different world trying to apply some of these principles and they're not lining up. So remember, that is not the problem he's trying to solve with this book, and nor does he claim to be. So just make sure that if you do choose to read it and you're not a knowledge worker, that you're keeping that lens on the whole time. I had to keep reminding myself, like, oh, wait, Megan, okay, no, in that environment, yes, this is fantastic advice. Now, where I do think there are some gaps is if you, again, if you are a knowledge worker who is also a primary caregiver, right? It just brings a lot more uncertainty, unpredictability to our lives. And I think that there's an opportunity here, even with all three of these principles, to really go back and revisit and think about, okay, how do I do fewer things at work, even when I'm a caregiver? How do I work at a natural pace, even as a primary caregiver? And how do I correctly obsess over quality so it doesn't, sink into perfectionism? Because the fact is, if you are a primary caregiver, you're going to be carrying a mental load and you are going to have to know how to prepare yourself for a little bit more, or sometimes a lot more, unpredictability in your life. But it doesn't mean that you still can't leverage slow productivity. So again, if this book seems like a good fit for you, highly recommend it, both reading and or audio. The audio was a fantastic listen as well. And we will see you back here next week on the show.